Somech noflim v'rofei cholim umatir asurim. What we're going to see is that these three phrases are both, there's a variety of different phrases that you might be able to put in this slot. And over time, those phrases sort of jumbled around and even expanded beyond three. But we're going to try to understand sort of also what's the connection between these phrases and Tchiyat HaMetim and giving life to the dead, which is going to take us to some of the midrashic understanding of these phrases. So let me, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. That's a good system. That was the quote that we saw about why rain is even better than Tchiyat HaMetim, because Tchiyat HaMetim, resurrection, is only for the righteous, at least in that Talmudic passage. In our bracha, it seems to be for everybody. But rain is for everybody. Rain is the most, sort of the broadest equalizer. Peretz Rodman wrote to me and pointed out this is actually probably being quoted from the New Testament, from Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 45. But either way, it sort of reflects our view of the rain as equalizing. And we're going to see that that tendency to look at this bracha as the great equalizer is going to come out in these phrases as well. Of course, we think of death as the equalizer that is, everybody dies in the end, but this bracha sort of turned that on its head. Everybody dies, but everybody comes back. There's no, death isn't the final word, and everybody has access to the sort of ultimate victory of life. So I brought you the different versions of this, of these three phrases. We're going to translate each of them as we go through them, more in depth, but just so you see the variety. So in the top right-hand corner, Somech noflim rofei cholim umatir asurim, just the sort of the quick translation, God supports those who are falling, God heals those who are sick, God releases those who are bound up or in bondage. That's sort of the standard view, but you see even the Rambam flips Rofei Cholim and Somech Noflim. So if you're going to try to make something out of the order, that order gets jumbled. And some other phrases creep in as well. Rav Sadia Gaon, who's about 1,100 years ago, he doesn't have Somech Noflim, who supports the fallen, but rather has Umishan Le'evyonim, who is a support for the poor. And there are some Talmudic texts that indicate that poor people are called Meitim in their lifetime, and therefore, if God is supporting the poor, is giving the poor something to lean on, then that's also sort of a version of what it means to come back from the dead. And then the sort of the pattern of three gets broken in other versions, where you have Rofei Cholim, Somech Noflim, Matir Asurim, but they stick in there Ozer Dalim. This is Shlomo Rabbi Natan, is another medieval Siddur. Ozer Dalim, who helps the poor, who helps those who are needy. And then, you've got Machzor Aram Sova, which is the Aleppo Machzor, puts both of them there, Ozer Dalim and Mishan Levyonim and Ezra Pecholim and Somech Noflim Matir. So you just have this sort of piling on. There's one that I particularly like, Rofei Cholim v'Somech Noflim, and instead of Matir Asurim, Zokef Kefufim, which is found in the Geniza, Zokef Kefufim, who straightens out the bent. And that is sort of an obvious connection, because the verse that this is drawn from, which you may recognize from Psalm 145, the psalm we call Ashrei, Somech Adonai l'chol noflim v'zokef l'chol hakfufim. So Somech Noflim and Zokef Kefufim, are meant to be sort of connected one after the other. I just brought to you on the second page, if you can see it, and this is the actual Geniza fragment that Uri Ehrlich published in his book, and you can see sort of 4 lines up from the bottom, Rofei Cholim v'Somech Noflim v'Zokef Kefufim, and then there's something running up the side here, which looks like maybe Umatir Asurim, but it's not totally clear what that was. So anyways, I just wanted to show you that from the from Geniza.org. And while we're on page 2, the Eretz Yisrael version of this bracha doesn't have any of these terms. Somech Noflim, Rofei Cholim, Matir Asurim, Mishan Levyonim, Ozer Dalim, doesn't have any of that. Instead, it has Mashpil Geim, who lowers the proud, and chazak ladun aritzim, and is strong to judge despots, which is another sort of equalizing. We saw this a few days ago, but it's the leveling view, and that's the version that was in the ancient Eretz Yisrael version of this bracha. Okay, so the bottom line is we have a variety of different phrases that are now coming, each of which are going to be connected to what it means to come back from the dead. I just wanted to say also that if these sound familiar, they come from another context as well, which is Birchot HaShachar, the brachot that we say in the morning, where there is a sort of direct connection between blessed are you, God, King of the universe, Matir Asurim, that's something that we say in the morning, and it's also something that we say in our Amidah, in at least our version of the Amidah. So the releasing from bondage is something that's shared between those morning blessings upon waking and our blessing here. And actually, if you sort of dig a little bit, the morning blessings, the blessings that are said upon waking, are in many ways a mirror of what the subject of our bracha is, which is to say, as we saw last week, sleep is a version of death. Sleep is 1/60th of death. So when you wake up in the morning, all the brachot that you say when you wake up in the morning are also meant to recall or rehearse the ultimate waking up, the ultimate resurrection of the dead. And therefore, Matir Asurim in our bracha and Matir Asurim in those morning blessings isn't so surprising. And actually, if you look at the variety of those morning blessings, because those also have a lot of variety, which I brought to you here, Moshe Chalamish did an article about that. All of these come in versions of the morning blessings, that some of which we say, some which we don't. But I bolded the ones that we have that also show up in our Amidah. So you have Rofei Cholim as a morning blessing. You have Ozer Dalim, Mashpil Geim, Somech Noflim. They're all morning blessings in some traditions. And so there's a real sort of interflow between the blessings that you say when you wake up versus the blessings that you, or the sort of the mentions, the descriptions that you say in this blessing about resurrection. So there's sort of a resurrection enactment that happens when we wake up in the morning. And this bracha is recalling that as well in these lists. So we're going to dive in a little more deeply to each of these phrases. I want to look with you at Somech Noflim. I'm moving over to page 2. As I mentioned, it comes from Psalm 145. Somech Adonai l'chol noflim. God supports those who have fallen, and straightens out those who are bent over. And the word kol in Ashrei is really the leitmotif, is really the word that guides that psalm. It's everybody who has fallen, everybody who is bent over. If you look for the word kol, everybody, all in Ashrei, you'll see it shows up, many, many times. So let's just look at one or two midrashim on this. And I want to say we're going to talk a little bit about giving birth as the opposite of death. That is to say, resurrection, not just as my life coming back after my death, but my ability to give life as a sort of response to the forces of death. And it's a sensitive topic, obviously, and don't want to necessarily ratify all the judgments that are being made in these texts, but it's important to see at least the rabbis connected resurrection and giving birth on the same continuum. So we see Somech Adonai l'chol noflim. The Midrash and Bereshit Rabbah says these are referring to those who are barren, who fall within their household, within their homes. There's sort of like a fallen state that is describing somebody who is not able to give birth, is not able to give life. But then, when the Holy One straightens out who are bent over, when the Holy Blessed One remembers them with children, they stand straight. And the example that they give in the Midrash is the story of Leah. Seems like Leah, in addition to Rachel, was not able to give birth, but God changed that. No, this is the case for Leah, was the hated one, Snu'ah. Leah was the not favored wife in the household. But when the Holy Blessed One remembered her, she was straightened, as it said, Adonai saw that Leah was hated, Vayar Adonai ki snu'ah Leah, vayiftach rachma. God opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So it's not clear to me why the proof text is that she was straightened, but it seems like she becomes less hated, or at least that's the plan, as a result of having children. So there's a Somech Adonai l'chol noflim is sort of a prayer, at least in this Midrash's understanding, for the ability to give birth. And we're going to come back to that later on in this bracha when we call God Master of Life and Death, which also seems to be a birthing image. I'm going to end with one with one last midrash on this topic, also jumping off this idea of Leah being able to give birth. The attributes of the Holy Blessed One are not like those of people. People, when they have a friend who is rich, they cling to him and bend over to him, nichpaf, like kofef, they bend over towards him. But when they see that his hand has failed and he became poor, if a rich person becomes poor, they forget about him, right? They don't consider him anymore, but instead they crush him. They literally put a stone on him. But that's not the way that God acts. The Holy Blessed One, when God sees a person bent over and his hand has failed, God gives them a hand and straightens them up. As it says, it doesn't say, God doesn't support those who are already standing on their own, but rather those who are noflim, those who have stumbled. It doesn't say those who are upright, but rather those who are bent over. That is to say, God is different from people because God actually sticks by you when you're stumbling and suffering, as opposed to people who are like fair weather friends and only with you when you're standing up straight and solid. And that's the Somech Adonai L'chol Noflim phrase in our bracha.